Okay, hello everyone. This is how kindness increases change capacity using a case study. And the agenda that we have for today is we're going to start with just very brief introductions. Then Pat and I are going to talk a little bit about building trust through transparent communication. And we're going to focus on this case study. And then using this real life story from Lehigh about what happened in this case study, Pat's going to kind of fill us in about what the reality was like. And then we'll just have a couple minutes for closing comments. So introductions. My name is Katherine Sanders. I'm a systems engineer. This is my cat, Sam, who always likes to come up and be introduced also. And I am a human factors engineer focusing on organization development. And this is my colleague.
I'm Pat Farrell. I'm a faculty member at Lehigh University. Until recently, I was provost at Lehigh. So I was provost at Lehigh for about 11 years. And before that, I was provost at University of Wisconsin-Madison for about 3 years. Let me add welcome to Kathy's welcome. Glad to have you here.
Awesome. So, all right. Some of you probably were in our August session. I think I recognize some names where we talked about kindness at work. And when Pat and I talk about kindness, we mean more than just a mindset or a attitude. What we mean are practical ways of working that increase people's capacity for both productivity and innovation, and also ways of working that support people in living a full life. So we want to recognize and honor human capacities, right? And we want to stay open and encourage people to build new skills and create new structures. Now, trust comes into this as a foundation. And the reason we're focusing on transparent communication today is because we believe that transparent communication is one of the major things that helps us build trust.
So before we get to the case study, which we will get to in just a couple of minutes, let me try to define what we mean by transparent communication, and then hopefully we can apply that to the case that you may have looked at. For us, transparent communication is the open sharing of information and includes periodic discussions of at least these three elements. First, what that information that's been shared means and why it might be relevant to the organization or to individuals or to me personally. So what's the meaning of the information? How does it connect to other information we already have, things we perhaps already knew, or information that we have from other sources that's coming at us from different directions? And then what might we do, or what do we imagine we're going to do based on this information? Are we headed towards making a decision or some key choices on the table? Does this information indicate that perhaps we need to learn more about some aspect of what's going on? So the point here is communication, transparent communication is about much more than information sharing. It's about that and that kind of open discussion about what does the information mean, how do we combine that with other things we know, and how does that eventually turn into some action that we might take, whether it's a decision or something we're all going to do. So a question we might pose to you and invite you to respond in the chat with whatever comes to mind is, given this very brief description of what our definition of transparent communication is, anything surprising? Is this what you might have expected in terms of a definition, or something quite different from what you're familiar with? So jot down any thoughts and put them in the chat, and everybody hopefully will get to see them, and we'll get a sense of how familiar or unfamiliar this kind of perspective on transparent communication is, at least amongst all of us.
We're waiting. Just as a note, Pat can't see the chat while he's sharing his slides, so I'm the interpreter here. So does this definition that we've created about open sharing of information with periodic discussions, does it resonate for folks, or does it seem surprising to you? So we have someone who says it resonates with them. That's great. I think for me, what I see most people, referring to when they say transparent communication, it's kind of like a set of information or email facts that go out to people that are kind of keeping people updated. And then someone asked a really good question. When does it or does it ever become too much communication? That's a good question. Pat, do you have any thoughts on that? When does it or does it ever become too much communication?
I would say it easily can, and that can feel like a burden itself.
Mm-hmm.
The way I think about that is, perhaps the source of occasionally too much information when I was a provost is trying to make it so that sort of engagement is not mandatory. Engage when you're interested and you have something to offer and wish to be part of the conversation. And if that's not where you are, I don't have to have anything to offer, but I just would like to see what people are talking about. That's fine. That's kind of a low pressure on you. You don't have to respond. You don't have to be part of it. But the flip side, of course, then is to say, as a consequence, later when a decision is made, you also don't get to say, no one asked me. They did ask you. You said, it's okay. You guys take care of it. I have confidence you'll make a good choice. Great. That's a great attitude. So I think it's a little bit of a learned process about how do we deal with when too much information is coming. And I can, much like you might not quite delete emails, but sort of imagine, how do I engage with the things that matter to me or I think I can contribute? And the others, I'll let other people who are better skilled or know more about it than I do manage those things.
So we have a couple more comments. Steve says it resonates with me. I think the issue is in the open part, as in not shared with a wider audience and keeping it to a smaller group of decision makers or stakeholders. And then Laura says, it seems like you can burden people with information that's above their pay grade to have to manage or deal with.
Again, I think I appreciate that. I think to me, the subtlety is, what's my expectation of people who are recipients of this information? Like, thanks, interesting, I'm going to move on with the rest of my day, or drop everything, you need to respond and somehow be actively engaged in the conversation. And I think, in my view, that's part of the practice, is to kind of build in those skill sets to say, I don't have to be actively involved in the conversation. It's interesting to know, happy to hear what my colleagues are doing. I'm getting on with my day.
And then Angelina says, on the other hand, can withholding information be a power play in the workplace?
Bingo.
Yeah.
You bet. You bet.
Yeah. That's typically the workplaces I've been in, that withholding is part of the culture, is that people tend to keep the information they have close and don't necessarily want to share it because they're afraid of other people's responses. So.
All right, let's go on. Hopefully you keep feeding your ideas into the chat, so don't let me stop, but in the interest of time, let me go on, because now we're going to ask you to think about that definition we've suggested and some of your ideas to amplify it in the context of this case study. So as Kathy mentioned, hopefully you got the handout in advance and got a glimpse of very brief case. The idea here is that your university has, if you haven't seen the case, has been offered an opportunity to purchase an abandoned factory near your campus. This wasn't on your radar. It wasn't part of some grand strategic plan, but the opportunity has arisen. And of course, you might want to somehow get other people's viewpoints on, is this a good idea or is this not? And so this notion of transparent communication, how can we use that in a way that gets, in some sense, the opinions you want, but also perhaps beyond this particular opportunity, may set a slightly different tone on my campus as to how do we share information, how do we get feedback, how do we engage others in the discussion. So specifically, I'd like you to think about and comment in the chat today's discussion question. Fast forward, so you've got the setup. Imagine a decision of some sort is made. What stories do we want our community to tell about what went into this decision 2 years from now? So if it was 2 years ahead of now, what stories would we like our community to tell? So let me give you a minute or two to sort of imagine a phrase or a storyline that you'd say, boy, I'd love it if I heard this. Hopefully you all are thinking.
Yes, well, I'm struggling with the chat a little bit, so that's
Okay.
partly on me. So if you could, if something comes up for you,
There we go.
here we go. Yeah. Okay. So that we promoted an opportunity for innovative thinking and went out of our comfort zones to encourage collaboration, new approaches, community, campus community engagement. Love it.
It's a good one. Very good.
Neb says, opportunity has presented itself in acquiring new land near our campus. Town hall meeting was held to hear input from everyone and how we might use this land.
Very good.
Does anyone else have something come up for them? What story would you like your folks to be telling in the future about how this was handled? Well, feel free to keep offering. Why don't we move ahead?
Okay.
And I will let you know, Pat, if other people are posting.
Okay. This may be an unusual way of thinking about events. I'm not sure everyone thinks that way. For me, this notion of stories that people tell actually is a great way to begin to anticipate how will the culture interpret my campus culture or my organizational culture, interpret the set of events. And to the extent I might prefer a certain kind of interpretation, is there something I can do now that might affect those stories that people will tell in the future?
Oh, we've got another couple comments. Steve says he's very much in sync with Laura's comment. And Angelina says, given the culture of the campus at the time, we thought the acquisition was in the best interest to all the campus to push innovation.
Good, good. So at a little bit about anticipating what some of the things you might say, and perhaps with the experience of actually being in this case myself, I sort of picked out a couple of major themes that I might think I would like to have emerge. And then I'll jump into a little bit, if you're curious, So what actually happened and what stories do people tell at Lehigh about this kind of event? So a couple of major themes. Done well, the process of change, and I think some of you identified that. That is, how is it we go about talking about the opportunity, engaging people in it, getting feedback, helping with the decision. That process actually is exactly how we build change capacity. That is, building our muscles in that process. A second point, a major theme that often emerges is that while we've been talking about transparent communication, people who are not us actually don't usually talk about that. The stories they tell will be about, just as you've identified, some element of the decision. We were all involved, or it was great to see innovation encouraged in ways we hadn't seen before. Great stories. Rarely is it about the transparent communication, but almost always those stories could not emerge without the transparent communication. The third major theme that often emerges is, and I think early on, a couple of you commented on this, that this notion of transparent communication seems very time consuming. It seems like we've somehow made decision-making and discussion more complicated and involving more people. Actually, my experience is absent these elements, sustainable results, particularly in organizations like universities, is very unlikely. We can get results by declaration, but it's unlikely those will sustain very long. Once the declarer has moved on to a different position, everyone will go back to the way things always were and happily ignore whatever change was in play. In my experience, once this idea of transparent communication becomes the normal way we talk, the normal way we interact, actually open exchange, this kind of open exchange can be relatively quick. It's not necessarily a huge time add. It is perhaps, as we're learning how to do it and have confidence in each other. But if we can make that the normal behavior and those levels of confidence are already in place, actually many of these open exchanges are continuous and fairly rapid. So we thought it would be interesting, even though you got just a glimpse of this particular case study, to hear a little bit about, so what did we do? What did I do? What did the people at Lehigh do? Well, quickly, I'll say we bought the building. It was fairly clear to me that, I think as a couple of you noted, this was going to be something that's quite out of the ordinary for Lehigh. And getting significant engagement on something very out of the ordinary is tough because people don't believe it's going to happen. So we had a short timeline. We decided actually we would go ahead and buy the building to sort of put something on the table that says, yes, it is going to happen. We bought it. Where I decided we could get substantial input and a lot of discussion is, well, what do we do with it? It can stay empty for years if we want. We just keep the thing heated, it'll be fine. Or we can try some experiments, or we could spend some time thinking about how might we at least imagine doing things quite differently. So that's how things transpired here, is given the context at Lehigh, was probably much more quick to take action on the purchase than might have been the case at another institution, but then took a long time deciding what to do with it. And as noted here, really invited a lot of experiments and experimenters and tried to lower the barriers to experimenting, meaning failure isn't really failure, or lack of success is not failure. So if I go to the bottom, what stories do folks tell now at Lehigh? This was not the only, but one of the early examples of, and people now do talk about, well, we can do some pretty out of the box things. That's a surprise. Even we're not entirely sure how it's going to turn out. We don't know exactly the endpoint, but we're okay with taking that leap and saying, let's just try it. Let's see what we can do with this. The second thing people talk about is the notion of doing experiments, particularly what I call academic experiments. Let's try some new things. Again, we're not sure how they'll turn out. The beauty of that has, which the part I like the best, is it has encouraged faculty to actually redefine success and failure in an academic experience looks like. It's less about them and about how they look and how knowledgeable they appear, and more about what students learn. And students learn an incredible amount from something faculty might call a failure, but to students, it's not a failure. It's a fabulous experience. So it was fun to see failure redefined. And the last one I would say is people began to recognize we really don't need unanimity to make a decision and do something. Would like to avoid major opposition, but some people will be very, very excited about an opportunity, and others, kind of lukewarm. That may be what we need to let that excitement grow, let that opportunity grow, and perhaps further along, others will join in, perhaps they won't. So these are the stories people tell now. I think I have one or two pictures which may not give you the full view. The right-hand side is sort of, this building was actually a building that had been used by Bethlehem Steel, had been abandoned for about 10 years. And it was full of heavy mechanical equipment like you see on the right-hand picture. I don't even know what these things are, some part of a steel making thing. And so we cleaned it all out. The left-hand picture isn't exactly the same location, so we can't really compare. We did some modest renovation, and that's sort of what it looks like now on the left, with still concrete floors, pretty basic windows, so it's not fancy. But it has created a space that seems to have resonated in terms of openness and inviting creativity because it's not well defined. And I think that has resonated well. But the time between those pictures was probably 4 or 5 years. That wasn't a quick, let's figure out what to do with it. It took quite a while for voices on campus to say, okay, we think we know sort of what we'd like to do.
So
Okay, let me turn it back to Kathy.
why don't we stay on your picture,
Oh,
Pat,
okay.
first, and then ask people if they have any questions. Do people have any questions about the process or the outcome that Pat had? You can type them in the chat, or you can raise your hand if you don't mind being on camera. Okay, so I don't see any questions in the chat. So now we can move on. I just want to say that Pat and I really believe in this transparent communication as a foundational way to build trust. And I know it sounds time consuming, and it is, but as trust grows, the time that people need in order to engage kind of decreases because they trust that if they want to be heard, they can find a way to be heard, right? I think it's the beginning of this process that is the most time consuming because people have to get over the habitual responses, right? So we also wanted to point out that you don't have to have buying a building as the opportunity to build trust, right? You can do this in any change initiative. You can start to build more trust by having these periodic conversations and really engaging people and listening to them and allowing them to help define what's going to happen. It doesn't mean the abdication of responsibility, right? But it means that you're getting input and you're talking to people about the implications of the input and the decisions you're going to ultimately make. So if these topics of kindness at work and change capacity are interesting to you, we have a couple ways you can engage with us. We're going to do another few free webinars just like this one in the new year. The next one's going to be January 25th, which is another Wednesday. It'll be at the same time. And on that webinar, I think we're going to focus on psychological safety as part of building trust. And then we also have a membership group called Leading System Change that people can jump into at any point in time. It meets every other Wednesday throughout the year. This, in 2022, the theme was resistance to change. And in 2023, the theme is going to be culture change through kindness. So that's another opportunity. And I'll post some information in the chat about leading system change and then contacting us. I also want to point out that bring into the conversation that there was a question. Neb has a question. What was the benefit gained by having transparent communication in the case of buying this building? What was shared with the campus community and what type of input did they have?
So thanks for the question. What was shared was early on that we had the opportunity. The window for agreeing to purchase or not was pretty short. So I would say, in my view, we did not really have time for sort of a full-blown, let's get everyone's opinion whether this is a good idea. I would add to that the kind of head scratching about what will we do with a building that has no resemblance to an academic building, I think confused the issue for a lot of people. So where in my view, the decision to purchase, therefore, really wasn't a very good example of this kind of transparent communication where we had time and opportunity for extended discussion. As I say, partly because of the time to buy, but partly also because I think the fact that it was sort of so conditional, I don't think people could really get their heads around what would we do. So I decided that we should go ahead and make the purchase and then let it be the established fact. We've got this giant building. It's like a barn. What should we do with this giant building? It's like a barn that doesn't look anything like any of the academic buildings we have. And that became really the conversation. At that point, I think the benefit of the transparent communication was significantly, I didn't have a desired outcome. And I made that quite clear that this is not, guess what I'm thinking. I have no idea what we should do this. I have some opinions, so do you, so do others. Let's share those and see where they take us. Well, we'll probably end up with some people who are really interested and want to do something. And a lot of other people say, oh, I'll watch. That sounds interesting, but I don't know if I want to completely engage. Great. And let's see as this evolves where it takes us. So I think the transparent part was helpful. First of all, it let people in on the secret is, I didn't know what this is supposed to be either. And I wasn't in any particular hurry to figure it out. I mean, we would over time, but no time limit. I was really eager to get lots of views, again, because I didn't know what the answer should be and didn't have a particular opinion of how it should turn out. And then we really were genuinely interested in seeing who all would like to at least try out some ideas. So
and another follow-up question from Neb. Whose idea was the final building look shown on the left?
Well,
and I'm just going to point out we're at noon now. So,
okay. So combination of architects who are great. I had little to do with it other than to say, we have a budget, people. We have a budget, people. And so the constraint of some money, but not infinite money, and clever architects who I would say got what we were after, meaning got the idea that how do we transform this building into something that just sort of screams creativity, innovation, do something that we've never thought of before. So I'll give the architects a lot of credit. The basic outline of the building didn't change. The structure didn't change.
So we need to, we need to end. But I think we're going to stay on a couple minutes if you want to talk more about this. But thank you, everyone, for attending today. I'm going to stop the recording.